Welcome to the 10-Minute Book Guide. Today, we're cracking open a really bracing insider account from the heart of a global empire. Sarah Wynn-Williams' book, Careless People, isn't just another story about working at Facebook. No, this is a stark warning about unchecked power, what happens when idealism dies, and the very real human cost of growing at all costs. That one line from the author, a 7-year Facebook insider, pretty much captures the entire arc of this book. It's a journey, right? It starts in those heady, optimistic days of a world-changing mission and ends with a grim look at what that mission actually became. So, how did it all go so wrong? To really get it, we're going to follow her path. First, we'll look at the idealistic gamble she took just to get in the door. Then we dive into the bizarre internal culture she found, the huge gap between the company's words and its actions, its ruthless global expansion, and finally, we land on her absolutely damning final verdict. So who exactly was this person who managed to talk her way into the center of Silicon Valley? And what in the world was she hoping to accomplish there? Well, Sarah Wynn-Williams was not your typical tech recruit, not even close. She was a diplomat from New Zealand, a survivor of a near-fatal shark attack, and a true idealist who really believed in changing the world. But after years of hitting brick walls at the UN, she got disillusioned. She realized that real, world-changing power wasn't in government anymore. It was in Silicon Valley. And to her, Facebook was the biggest one going, a brand new kind of political force. So with this incredible grid, she actually used Facebook to network her way in, pitched a job that didn't even exist, and convinced them to hire her. She got there just buzzing with hope, ready to build the rules for this new global community. But what she found inside was a culture so strange, so completely disconnected from reality, it was almost hard to process. The first shock was just the place itself. The offices, even in these super fancy DC buildings, were intentionally unfinished. I'm talking exposed pipes, raw concrete, even fake graffiti on the walls. The official line was that it symbolized Facebook's mission, we're only 1% finished. It was all a very deliberate performance of being this scrappy, ongoing project. But this curated chaos didn't exactly impress everyone. There's this great story where a German government minister comes to visit, and she's not thinking about philosophy, she's worried about building code violations. And that moment just perfectly shows the gap between how Facebook saw itself and how the rest of the world saw them, not as revolutionaries, but as maybe a little unhinged. And then there was the money. Oh man, the money. Wynn-Williams suddenly found herself surrounded by people living in a completely different reality. She had to learn a whole new vocabulary, like economic volunteers. These were executives so rich from the Google IPO, they literally didn't need a salary. Or price insensitive, a state of being where cost is just not a factor. She also learned from Sheryl Sandberg that the insane workload was a feature, not a bug. The idea was to give people way too much to do so they wouldn't have time to cause trouble. It was a culture of extreme wealth and all-consuming work that was just totally alien to her. This cultural disconnect, it was really just the beginning. The heart of this book is about the profound hypocrisy she saw every day, this ever-widening canyon between the slogans Facebook preached to the world and the reality of how it actually worked. In this contrast is absolutely everything. Publicly, the mission was making the world more open and connected, but internally, the mantra was move fast and break things. They'd tell you to bring your authentic self to work, but Wynn-Williams quickly found that being a mother was something you were expected to hide. Sheryl Sandberg's whole lean in thing preached seek and speak your truth, but in reality, anyone who delivered bad news got metaphorically shot. And maybe the most telling thing of all, while they were building this global community, many top executives, including Sandberg, were strictly limiting their own kids' screen time, a pretty clear sign they knew the dangers of what they were building. And this just perfectly illustrates the leadership style. Wynn-Williams tells this chilling story about a senior executive who showed up a few minutes late to a meeting. Instead of just moving on, Sandberg stopped the entire meeting and publicly humiliated her, not for being late, but for her, quote, failure to anticipate traffic. It was this brutal display of power that was the complete opposite of her carefully crafted public image as this empowering female leader. And then there was Mark Zuckerberg. For years, Wynn-Williams only interacted with him through layers of management. But one day, after defending a policy position on Sheryl Sandberg's behalf, she got her first ever direct email from the CEO. It was just 4 words: I am overruling you. This wasn't just a simple disagreement. It was a signal. It was the moment Zuckerberg went from being a distant founder to the ultimate unilateral decider on everything, no discussion needed. This shift in leadership basically put the company's main directive, growth, on steroids. It wasn't about community anymore, not connection. It was about relentless global expansion at any cost. Facebook started acting less like a tech company and more like an empire. So this became the real question driving everything. And the answer, as Wynn-Williams discovered, was pretty much as far as it takes. The company's ambition was limitless, and its ethics were becoming more and more flexible. Zuckerberg's whole mindset just got more and more confrontational. In one meeting, Wynn-Williams was shocked to hear him praise Uber's aggressive street fighter tactics against regulators. He started talking about creating lists of political adversaries, basically anyone who stood in Facebook's way. He even suggested using the platform itself to put pressure on them. The mission had totally changed. It wasn't about connection anymore, it was about pure domination. And you can see this worldview perfectly in his obsession with China. For Zuckerberg, getting into China wasn't some complex moral question about working with an authoritarian regime. Nope, it was the final move in a global game of risk. China was the last big territory on the board, and he was determined to capture it, no matter what he had to compromise on. His view of other powerful institutions was just as predatory. When his team was talking about partnering with news organizations, he basically chewed them out for compromising. Why partner with a dying industry, he asked, when you could be dominating it, crushing it? I mean, that's not the language of someone building a neutral platform. That is the language of a conqueror who wants total control. So after all these years of watching this decay from idealism straight into raw power politics, what was her final diagnosis? What was the real root cause of all these failures? The author argues that the problem at Facebook wasn't just simple greed or some evil intent. This isn't a story about a comic book villain plotting world domination. It was something way more insidious and honestly a lot more dangerous. She calls it lethal carelessness, and this is her big idea. It's a culture so fixated on its own numbers, its own growth, its own power, that it developed this profound and dangerous indifference to the real-world impact of its products. It's not that they wanted to enable genocide in Myanmar or help spread political misinformation. It's that the consequences for other people in other countries just didn't even register as important compared to the main goal, growth. And this corporate carelessness eventually blew up in her personal life. She talks about facing sexual harassment from her boss, being pressured to work right after a childbirth so traumatic she nearly died, and getting zero support from senior leadership. When she finally reported it all, she says the investigation was turned against her, focusing on her performance until she was ultimately forced out. The very system she had tried so hard to reform from the inside ended up consuming her. And that really brings us to her final warning. This isn't just a story about the past. Wynn-Williams argues that this culture of lethal carelessness is now baked into the DNA of big tech. And as we move into an era of even more powerful tech like AI, the consequences of that same indifference could be absolutely catastrophic. Her book is a plea, really, to learn from these mistakes before it's too late. This is the 10-Minute Book Guide, your weekly shortcut to deciding what to read next.